The wind, a precursor to the storm, sweeps low across the vast, treeless tundra. It carries ice crystals.
Temperatures plummet to -50 degrees Celsius. For weeks, the sun has not risen above the horizon.
In the treeless expanse of northern Fennoscandia, a family sets up camp. They are not seeking shelter in a cave or constructing a wall. One person lifts 3 birch poles, locking their notched tips together in the air, then carefully spreads the base. The frame stands without stakes or ropes. Within minutes, additional poles are leaned into the crown, forming a robust structure. Reindeer hides are unlaced and stretched over the structure, with the hair side facing inward, overlapping at the edges. A gap is intentionally left at the peak, and a smaller one at the ground. A fire is then lit at the tent's center. As the blizzard arrives, the Lavvu stands firm. This tent, refined over thousands of years, is designed. The problem: how to survive a climate that kills in minutes, while constantly moving to avoid the cold's permanent advantage. For over 10,000 years, the Sami people have inhabited the northern territories of modern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia's Kola Peninsula. Archaeologists trace human presence in this region back to the last ice age, when populations tracked game across a recovering landscape. Over millennia, as the Arctic climate stabilized, the Sami developed a survival strategy centered entirely around one animal. The semi-domesticated reindeer, Reindeer tarandus, was more than just food. It defined the very terms of their existence. A reindeer herd cannot graze in one spot all winter. They consume slow-growing lichen, quickly depleted by their hooves. A stationary herd quickly exhausts its food, leading to starvation. The people herding them must constantly follow. A family building a permanent, immovable home would face starvation within a single season. The landscape necessitated nomadism, requiring a shelter that could be transported across hundreds of kilometers of tundra. The Lavvu is the direct architectural consequence of these constraints. The Sami understood their environment through an 8-season calendar, far more precise than temperate regions' 4-season model. Dalve, deep winter, from December to March, is the most punishing season. During this time, the sun never rises above the horizon. Starlight on snow is the only light. Temperatures regularly hit -50 degrees Celsius, and wind accelerates across the flat, treeless tundra. To survive, reindeer must be guided to sheltered inland areas, where loose snow allows them to dig for lichen. As sheltered areas shift, the family follows. The Lavvu's construction begins with 3 birch poles. Birch, the tree closest to the Arctic tree line, is the last species before the terrain becomes pure tundra. The Sami harvested poles from northern birch stands, selecting straight shafts with naturally forked or deliberately notched tips. These 3 primary poles are raised and interlocked at their crowns, their notches meshing to reinforce each other's grip. The resulting tripod is structurally self-contained. Its geometry provides stability without external forces. Once the tripod is locked, 12 to 15 additional poles are radially leaned against the apex, resting within the primary frame's fork. Each added pole increases the inward and downward load, tightening the crown rather than loosening it. The completed frame requires no guy wires, stakes, or anchors. A single person can raise it. In sudden blizzards, this speed is crucial, marking the difference between shelter and deadly exposure. The Lavvu's aerodynamic profile isn't aesthetic. It sits lower and wider than expected. Its squat height-to-base ratio addresses the tundra's primary mechanical threat, not weight or cold, but wind. Wind hitting a tall structure creates lift and lateral force. The Lavvu's low, convex profile deflects wind upward, pressing it down, not sideways. Tundra Sami faced extreme winds, making taller shelters impossible. The Lavvu's proportions are a calibrated response to this environmental force. The Lavvu lacks external smoke flaps, unlike other conical tents. In the Scandinavian tundra's winds, such flaps would act like sails. The Lavvu's design eliminates lateral forces, managing smoke solely through physics. At the center, the Aran hearth burns, heating the surrounding air. This less dense, heated air rises in a column towards the open hole at the tent's apex. As warm air exits, it creates a low-pressure zone at the base. Cold air is drawn in through a small gap at the hide's edge, or the partially open entrance. Fresh air feeds the fire, heating more air, which rises and exits, drawing in more cold air. This continuous loop is self-sustaining. The interior remains smoke-free. The rising column carries combustion gases directly to the apex, preventing pooling at human level. The thermal column acts as a pressure barrier. Dense exterior air cannot drop through the smoke hole against the rising warm air's outward pressure. Inside, the tent maintains a survivable temperature, while the polar night outside remains at -50 degrees Celsius. The floor addresses the other cold problem. While fire manages air temperature, the ground conducts body heat away faster than the air provides it. Sleeping directly on permafrost causes core temperature loss. The Sami layered the floor with fresh birch branches. Over the lattice, heavy reindeer furs were laid hair side up, providing thick insulation. The birch layer prevents ground moisture from rising. The fur layer traps a thermal pocket at body level. Many Lavvu also included a roakas, a secondary lining inside the main frame. This inner layer trapped a dead air buffer, reducing heat loss through the tent wall. It also prevented moisture from breath and cooking from condensing as ice. The cover material, reindeer hair, is structurally hollow, a biological coincidence exploited with precision. Magnified, each strand is a hollow tube, not solid, trapping insulating air not just between hairs, but within each strand. This structure's physics makes reindeer hide a superior cold barrier. Trapped static air within microscopic tubes resists conductive heat transfer. When multiple hides are sewn together, hair side inward, each layer forms millions of sealed insulating chambers, pressed against the interior air.
Hides were sewn with bone needles and reindeer sinew thread. Sinew seams do not gap or split in the cold.
The thread contracts and tightens in low temperatures, sealing the seam. Choosing these robust, natural fibers in an environment where every seam could leak heat, thread that sealed in cold rather than shrinking was the correct material choice. With 19th and 20th century European canvas, Sami families gradually shifted tent cover materials from hide to canvas, then to synthetics. Canvas was lighter and easier to transport. The 20th century portable cast iron stove replaced the open aran, reducing fuel and simplifying heat management. Neither transition altered the Lavvu's underlying geometry or airflow. The tripod frame, squat profile, and smoke hole system remained. Reindeer were the Sami's entire resource. Their meat and organs provided essential protein and fat when agriculture was impossible and plant foods were buried under snow. Reindeer blood was cooked into thick gruels, fat-rich milk made into cheese, and bones/antlers carved into tools. Sinew sewed garments and shelter. Reindeer were both the reason for nomadism and the material source for every survival system. This zero-waste economy was arithmetic, not philosophy. In a surplus-free environment, losing any material from a slaughter, the Sami processed everything, including fuel for the aran, with precision. In the Arctic, dry wood is surprisingly rare. Dead birch rots, making it poor fuel. The Sami burned freshly cut, raw birch, which burns intensely when ignited, providing immediate heat and light. Above the tree line, where birch yields to tundra vegetation, they used slow-burning willow, which retained heat in its embers for hours after the flame died. Wood selection for food smoking was precise. Sami records show a preference for willow over birch when smoking reindeer meat. Modern analysis confirms the reasoning. Birch smoking produces polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons exceeding safety thresholds. Willow smoke keeps compounds below toxicity. This distinction was vital because smoked reindeer meat was a primary.
Frequent exposure to unsafe smoke residues would have caused serious health issues. The Sami found safer methods through direct.
Modern lab equipment confirmed what empirical observation already established. The Lavvu's thermal management extended beyond its structure. The system included coordinated clothing layers worn inside and outside. At -50 degrees, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes. Transitioning between Lavvu and tundra required a clothing system managing the thermal gradient without failure. Hollow hair insulation, effective for tents, was also used in garments. Worn hair side out, the bieska shed wind and trapped warm air against the body.
Over the bieska, the luka,
A hooded wool poncho provided mechanical protection for the fur beneath.
Meltwater-saturated hair collapses. The luka sheds snow, preventing it from melting against the bieska's fur, thus preserving the garment's insulation. Footwear, called gapmagat or galahat, was made from the densest reindeer hide, typically from the animal's legs or forehead, where the skin is densest. Wool socks were less effective in this context, because wool, once damp with sweat, loses much of its insulating capacity. A wet foot in -50 degrees proceeds toward frostbite within an hour. Sennegrass delayed that process indefinitely when maintained correctly.
Upon returning from hours in the open, a herder entering the Lavvu initiated a sequence of thermal system maintenance actions.
The luka was beaten to dislodge snow before it melted into the bieska. Boots were opened, sennegrass removed, separated, and placed near the aran to dry. Core body temperature, lowered by prolonged cold exposure, was restored from the inside through the consumption of baidosos. The shelter was the recovery mechanism of the larger system, the zone where the body could return to operational temperature before the next period of cold exposure. The Lavvu also functioned as the cosmological center of Sami existence. In traditional pre-Christian territories, every major action, from lighting the fire to butchering an animal, carried spiritual dimension. The Aran, the central hearth, was the residence of Saraka, the goddess of fertility and childbirth. Her name connects etymologically to the Sami word for splitting. Childbirth rituals were performed at the hearth. A piece of wood was ceremonially split, symbolizing the birth canal's opens. Offerings of meat, cheese, and water were placed directly into the fire before a birth, and following a successful delivery, the warmest, most central location in the shelter was also its spiritual nexus, the site where new human life was formally received into the world. The entrance and the area immediately flanking it were the domain of Uksaka, the doorwoman, guardian of the threshold and protector of infants learning to walk. Women sat in this forward zone to conduct the domestic labor that kept the camp functional, processing sinew into thread. Essential but utilitarian items, the daily firewood supply and the camp dogs, were kept just inside the entrance. The rear of the Lavvu, directly opposite the entrance, was the boasho, the sacred back zone, exclusively male. The boasho had its own separate entry flap, used to move objects that were spiritually incompatible with the front door. When someone died inside the Lavvu, the body was carried out through the back door. Taking it through the front end entrance was concordance. The most elaborate application of these spatial rules involved the bear. In traditional pre-Christian Sami animatale, killing a bear was a spiritual ordeal structured across 7 formal ritual stages, beginning with tracking. When a hunting party brought a bear carcass back to camp, the hide and meat entered exclusively through the boasho. Women were required to avoid direct sight of the hide during initial ceremonies, instead wearing blindfolds and shooting arrows and stretching salt. The bear's bones were then carefully placed in a tree or buried to allow its spirit to return to the sky. A family or small group spending months in continuous proximity under extreme physical stress, with lethal cold immediately outside. The spatial rules of the Lavvu assigned every person a defined position and role. They separated activities. They located the most dangerous and spiritually charged activities at the margins of the space, and the nurturing center at the hearth. Migration dissolved the camp efficiently when the reindeer herd depleted the local lichen and the family needed to move. The Lavvu's design accommodated the logistics without waste. The hides were unlaced from the poles, folded, rolled, and loaded onto pulks, the shallow, boat-shaped kitchens. The poles, being long and cumbersome and not required as cargo space, were bundled and tied directly to the harness rigging. Castrated male reindeer were selected and trained for this work over time, developed into reliable draft animals through an ongoing exchange of labor and supplemental feeding. The entire architectural footprint of a family's camp could be relocated by a small number of animals. A structure that there was no separation between the shelter system and the herding economy. The route the reindeer walked determined where the Lavvu rose next. Every design decision in the Lavvu, from the weight of the poles to the way the hides folded to the absence of stakes, the Lavvu survived the introduction of canvas, the cast iron stove, snowmobiles, and permanent housing. The structure that for millennia had meant survival in the field became a political statement. The Norwegian Sami Parliament building, completed in 2005, draws its roofline from the Lavvu, a structure that solves wind, cold, moisture, condensation, smoke, and weight using only geometry. The most sophisticated response to the harshest conditions human beings have ever inhabited was not a massive, permanent fortress of stone and mortar. The Sami did not outlast the Arctic by resisting it. They read it precisely enough to move with it and build